On our Friday episode of Locked On Raptors, is it possible for a rebuilding team to underachieve? Yes, it is. We'll get into why and much more on today's show. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Friday, October the 18th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. Been covering the Toronto Raptors now for going on 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the hell website that sucks, at Woodley Sean. You can find the show on Instagram at Locked On Raptors, and you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join. We'd love to see you become part of our listener community over there. And you can now also subscribe to the Locked On Raptors daily newsletter. It's free. It's directly to your inbox, and it starts on Monday. Original writing from me 5 days a week. We'll do game coverage, practice coverage as I'll be around the team this season, regular sort of daily blogs and stuff as I come out of retirement from the blog game. Would love to see you subscribe to the newsletter. The link is in the description of the podcast. Again, to go do that. It's on my socials and stuff as well today. So please go and subscribe. It helps me out greatly, and it's going to be great stuff. I really think it's going to be worth the, again, free subscription. There's a no downside to subscribing and plenty of upside because it's going to be awesome. All right. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Please place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And we will get started here on a Friday episode of the show as we kind of do the yin to yesterday's yang. Yesterday, I took a look at ways in which the Toronto Raptors can overachieve, what it would look like, what it would take for them to finish in the high 30s in wins and clear their 30.5 FanDuel over-under in terms of wins for this season. Today, we look at the other side of that coin. How do they underachieve? What does an underachievement look like? What does an underachievement mean for the offseason and the decisions that lie ahead for this team? I think this is a bit of a juicier one. And honestly, there are more avenues for underachievement to occur for the Raptors this season. It's just the way it is. It's where they're sitting, and it's just the reality of a team that has declared itself to be in a rebuild. I think the pathways to finishing with the high 30 wins pretty narrow. The pathway to finishing under 30, it's very, very voluminous in terms of the numbers of roads they could take to get there. And look, not all of them are bad. And frankly, I do think when it comes to over versus underachieving, I think the overachieving is very much tied to the win total, right? Do they push themselves further up the standings than we thought? If they're doing that, then a lot of these boxes are getting ticked and it feels good and happy and all that stuff. Underachievement, there's a lot of different ways that can look. And I think the nature of whatever the underachievement, if it happens, looks like is going to, the sort of response to that, the feelings about that are going to depend on how it all gets to that point. I think really underachievement this season is not so much about wins and losses because, as we've talked about, I don't think wins and losses are the thing to worry about this year. If you're fretting over individual game results, you're probably not doing your fandom correctly this season. If they're winning games, great. That's awesome. That's fun. Winning basketball games is a hoot, and it probably means good things are happening for the most important players on this team. If they're losing games, but some things are looking all right, some things are looking promising, but just sort of the general fundamental flaws of the roster and the schedule and the difficulty of it, and just the fact that they're in a league that's really, really good. If all of that stuff tilts them under 30 wins, but some other key fence posts are being cleared, then I think you're probably feeling all right. Again, there's a lot of different ways that this can go. As far as the going and winning more north of 30 games, I think that's a pretty narrow margin. I think you're probably looking at like a 25 to 30%, maybe 20%, 15% range of outcomes of the Raptors actually going and winning 35 plus games. That's kind of where I pencil in the overachievement. If they're over 35 wins, that counts to me as overachieving. The chances of going under 30, again, that's probably more of like a 75 to 80% chance that that's going to happen. And I think the sort of flip side of that, when you look at the chances of the sort of individual player stuff working out well, the development of Scottie Barnes, RJ Barrett, Immanuel Quickley, Grady Dick on down the line, the important young guys, I think I actually feel pretty good about it being an overachievement or not an underachievement from those guys. And I do think it's like probably like a 70-30 proposition that we come out of this year, no matter what the end of season record is, feeling pretty good about what the core guys have and what they can offer. Maybe it all doesn't quite come together this year, but you can project forward and say, "Ooh, another year of seasoning, another year of growth, another year of just becoming more mature. This team can actually go and do something with these core guys. We got to figure out the rest of the roster." That's kind of how I'd stack up the odds of the over versus underachievement from the player perspective thing. When it comes to the wins and losses, look, the eject button is going to be there, kind of blinking, flashing, sirening red all season long, that they can just go slap that eject button anytime and tumble down the standings. How do they slap that eject button? It's trades, right? Do they trade all of their viable bench dudes, Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, and already take away from what's already a weakness of the team and make it worse so that they descend further into just testing stuff out with young dudes who aren't going to win you games? It's very, very possible. There's also the injury thing, right? Oh, he picked up a little nick on his knee. Oh, he's out for a month. Whoops. Okay. Jakob Poeltl broke a fingernail. Oh, that's a 2-week injury. Like, you can kind of rig the injury situation however you want it to keep guys out. We've seen this happen before. To be clear, I think it sucks. I hate that. I think it's like anti-competitive, and the NBA should be like outlawing that kind of garbage because it sucks. It makes the back end of the regular season fake and not fun and uninteresting and like waste of time for a lot of people. It sucks, but it's the reality we live in, and there's a very real chance that eject button is going to become more and more tantalizing for the Raptors to press as the season progresses and they, aren't getting the win total that would require, that would have to have in order for them to not press that button to go and, try to get a couple extra lottery balls. Again, lottery balls, I don't care. I think it's all just a giant dartboard and yeah, sure. 14% chance of number one pick. That's great. Sure. I'm not losing my entire, like, oh man, I'm not selling out a whole season for that. That seems lame. It seems dumb. Ask the Pistons how that's going. Anyway, I digress. You know how I feel about tanking. I think this also, the eject button could get even more extreme, right? If they decide to trade Jakob Poeltl, I think he's the sort of one guy of what you would consider the core of the team right now who could get moved. I've made my point on that as well. I think trading Jakob Poeltl would be absolutely foolish. I think they can still kind of have their cake and eat it too and have a nice developmental season, play some serious basketball, probably hit the eject button in the last 5 to 10 games as opposed to the last 20 like they did last year out of necessity. And you feel pretty good about where things are going. And you also haven't traded away the guy who allows you to play competent, functional basketball. That to me is like the perfect outcome here. And, again, trading Jakob Poeltl, I know that's going to be a thing. I know Eric Kareen mentioned it, one of his bold predictions yesterday at the Athletic. I cannot express how much of a terrible idea that is. This team is not in a position to keep on tearing down. They've already done the tear down part. And it's kind of go time when you have guys on second contracts who are making money. This is not, I'll say it for the 1,000th time, as much as everyone wants it to be this is not your classic rebuild where you have a bunch of guys on rookie contracts and you have time to slow play it, see what you have, pick your guys, move on from other guys, and then the second contracts come around and you're really hitting go time. Go time is already upon us. RJ Barrett is on his second deal and has 2 years left beyond this one. Immanuel Quickley is on his second deal. Scottie Barnes is going to be on a max contract in a year. The time for kind of waiting it out and kicking the can further down the road to get more picks and hope that those guys turn into something 3-4 years down the road. Well, 3-4 years down the road, it's going to be near the end of the run if you're not playing competitive basketball by then. And so Jakob Poeltl, he's not perfect. He's not a great center. He's a good center. He brings a lot to this team and allows them to play real basketball. I think moving on from him would be very foolish and set yourself back. And, what's your succession plan, right? Is it Yves Missi from the Pelicans? Spoiler alert, that's not going to cut it, right? He's a rookie. He's very raw. He doesn't do any of the stuff the Raptors like their bigs to do in the half court when it comes to playmaking and, dribble handoff, stuff like that, because he's a child. And, anyone you trade for is like a future big, whether it's someone who's in the league now or a pick, a totally speculative teen that you might take with a pick this summer or next. Like, you can't count on those guys becoming real winning contributors in the next few years. You just can't. You're at the point now where you can't move on from Jakob Poeltl without having a Jakob Poeltl-like replacement or upgrade to keep you playing competent basketball. That's the situation they're in right now. And how does that play into the underachievement thing? Again, like, if the thing is looking good with the main guys and they're still losing games, I don't think that is an underachievement. I don't think that necessitates trading Jakob Poeltl and starting from scratch. If things are going horribly with the main guys, then maybe that changes the calculus there, which we'll get into coming up in a second here. We're going to get into underachieving and what it looks like and what it could mean, the various different shapes it could take, and what the team itself, what the sort of fabric of the team might resemble if things are not going super well or according to plan. We'll get to that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by Hims, a new sponsor here on the podcast. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't got time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping a foot outside your door. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. That's pretty great. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products, which are not approved or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. HIMS.com/lockedon. Back at it here, talking underachievement, what it could look like, and how things could really go off the rails for the Raptors this season. Again, I don't think the sort of idea of underachieving is tied to wins at all, right? It's all about what the players themselves actually do, and there are ways in which they quote unquote underachieve and lose games, where the good players who matter and the important core guys for the future actually do show out and prove that there's something there. Of course, there is the very, very nasty, you hope you don't see it outcome where Scottie is closer to the guy we saw last year than the guy who makes a step into the All-NBA conversation. And there's still the open question of, can this guy be the best player on a serious playoff team? That's on the table if things don't go well this season. There's the question of Immanuel Quickley, where he maybe can't progress to becoming a multi-level scorer, becomes too 3-point dependent. And while that's valuable, he doesn't really have the juice to be a co-engine of the offense next to Scottie Barnes the way they've paid him to be. You have the outcome where RJ Barrett can't quite replicate last year's efficiency, which was incredible, of course, and is a very high bar to clear. I feel good he can get close to it just because of the tangible changes to the way he plays basketball within the Raptors system versus what he did for the Knicks. I totally buy into that. I think he can still be this ridiculously efficient player. He seems energized, all of that. But if it doesn't happen and he's hitting 34% of his threes and he goes from shooting near 70% at the rim to like 65 and it becomes a little bit more inefficient, plus his defensive issues persist, then that's going to make it apparent that the Raptors need a different long-term solution on the wing. That's like the worst case scenario. Those three guys in particular, you can bake in Grady Dick having some stagnation as well, though I think he's still got plenty of runway. Not super worried there. But if those three guys, Quickley, Barrett, Barnes, all prove that it just doesn't quite work, or they're not alluding to years down the line it coming together and working, that's a problem. And that's going to create some pretty uncomfortable things to consider this summer. It's pretty close to DEFCON 1 if that is the form of underachievement. That is the way this team underachieves, really. If those three guys can't work it out, no matter what the win total is, that is an underachievement. That is a sort of missing of the goal of this season, which is to prove what you got in those three guys. And if you prove that what you got is not something you want to be building around, that's tough because you've already paid Quickley. Barrett is, he's making money for a couple more years. You're probably gonna have to look at moving him this summer, frankly, at the peak of his value. If that's in fact where he is, maybe the peak of his value, if things go poorly this year, was this past summer. And, you couldn't have foreseen that, obviously, but that's on the table. Again, I don't think this is the likely outcome. I do think if I feel good about anything with this team, it is the core four guys plus Jakob Poeltl and their fit in particular on offense together. I think it's going to work really nicely. I think the offense is going to kick ass. And by the way, we might see Immanuel Quickley play tonight for the first time in the final preseason game. It seems like he was cleared for contact earlier this week and participated in full contact practice per Michael Grange. and sounds like he is going to be very possibly in the lineup tonight, which is very exciting. Either way, that is how this team underachieves. That's what it looks like. There's a world where like they hit the under on wins and you can quote unquote call it an underachievement by Vegas standards, I suppose. But if Scottie, RJ, IQ, Grady Dick prove to be something worth building around, they make tangible steps together. The starters win their minutes, maybe even by a lot, but they get dragged down because the bench sucks. Then I think you can live with that form of quote unquote underachievement. I don't even know if that is underachievement. I think that's just kind of what I expect to happen to this team this year. The starters are going to carry the day. When they're not in, it's going to be pretty rough. If they can find a way to piece together bench units, all of a sudden, I think this team is going to win way more games than they're projected to. That's where the overachievement comes in. I just am a little skeptical that they're going to be able to find those bench looks. But hey, crazier things have happened. Benches they're like bullpens sometimes, and it all just clicks in. And you have yourself a nice bench that kind of surprises. They have a couple nice pieces. I think Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, when he's healthy, give you a nice base. I think they can stagger in Quickley and Barnes and be passable. There's ways in which this works out. There are outcomes on the range of possibilities where the bench is passable and not actively hemorrhaging points every single time they're on the floor. That would be great. Again, I'm not fully expecting that. And so I do think the shape of this season is mostly going to look like the main guy's good, the rest of the guys not so good. And you're kind of going into the offseason feeling decent about where things sit, but probably adding another high lottery pick to the mix, which, hey, maybe you're fine with that. It's not going to be bad if they get a high lottery pick. I just don't think you need to sell yourself out to go and get one because the lottery is a total crapshoot and the draft is also kind of a total crapshoot. But yeah, I think you probably also, if you get that situation where the bench really sucks and the starters are good, you're probably looking at really selling off Kelly Olynyk, Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher, all of your bench pieces that aren't tied down. Davion Mitchell of a team will take him on as an expiring guy. Like you're probably just doing a full sale. Get all the guys on the bench out of there. Let's go see Jonathan Mobo and Jamal Shed and Ulrich Shamshe and Jacoby Walter go and cook and see what they can do as your bench unit. Won't be good because rookies are bad, but hey, all bench, 4 rookies off the bench. Why not close the season that way when you also have your starters to go and do good things? Hey, that might even let them play the starters deeper into the season if the bench is that destitute. But that's like, I think the most likely sort of shape that this season takes. And I don't even think I'd classify that as an underachievement. They just win fewer than 30 games probably if the bench is that bad. You also got to factor in injury luck here too, right? Like injury luck is going to play a role here, right? If the team cannot withstand, I mean, we know they can't withstand injury to Scottie or Poeltl. We just saw it. I also don't think they can withstand injury to Quickley. And, with all those guys, I think they do have a chance to be a semi-serious team. And the starters, again, I think will be excellent. But one or God forbid, more than one of those guys goes down. And they're not just going to have any shot. They're going to be a disaster. They're going to be rudderless. They're going to have a really hard time winning any games, even if it's against bad opponents. Like those 3 guys in particular, the offensive engines, all 3 of them, are part of how the offense moves. And just like they have the most talent, the most defensive stability in the form of Poeltl and Scottie. Like it's just without those guys, it gets really, really tough. Again, I think they can withstand Barrett being out for a bit just because he's not essential to initiating everything in the offense. He's a play finisher. Their play finishing will hurt, but maybe Grady Dick can fill in there a little bit. You have guys who can kind of occupy that role. Ochai Agbaji can play the RJ Barrett role on offense. He won't do it as well, but he can play that kind of fly around, run off curls, ram towards the rim, all that type of stuff. Like he can passably do that archetype of player stuff if he's not going to do it very well. But you quickly Scottie, Poeltl, any of those guys goes down, it sucks. And I do think that helps to sort of look. This is the thing. Like those guys go down, there's a way in which this is just like a lost season again, which is an underachievement. This is not supposed to be a lost season. This is supposed to be a season where you learn some stuff. But if those guys go down and you can't play functional basketball, that sucks. Like that's a bummer. Like I would much rather this team be a 25-win team on its own merits than a 25-win team that is there because they had injuries, right? Like I think as much as the injury stuff might help with the lottery balls, I do think there is just a cost to not playing foundation laying ball this season. They're trying to do something. They're trying to build something. And if injury prevents them from doing that, yes, that form of underachievement nets them a high pick. Surely this is probably the highest pick they're going to get is if they get injury bad luck and they tumble down the standings. That is the best for their lottery odds. But at what cost? Because you miss out presumably on long stretches of getting a look at these guys in a year that's supposed to be about getting a look at these guys and seeing how they fit together. And so you hope it doesn't happen. You got to account for the possibility, though, because this team is not deep enough to withstand serious injury to any of those three guys in particular. And if you got a couple of them down, man, oh man, it's going to be a long season. And again, you're going to lose out on the chance to actually do the stuff you have declared you want to do this season. As much as they said they're rebuilding and the draft is important, they have also said, we want to build something. We want to play competitive basketball. We want to establish core principles and tenets. If you don't have the guys who help you do that, then it's a lost season. It's an underachievement, even if the pick reward might be kind of nice. It's just tough. Like, you start losing this much every single year, wasting seasons, not building anything, not building continuity, coherence. Like, you can become the Pistons. You can become these teams that just wallow for years and years. You hope that doesn't happen. Again, I don't think it's going to happen, barring injury, but it's something you got to consider. The injury bug is something they badly got to avoid this year. You really hope they can get some injury luck. Again, if they win 25 games and it's because the starters are just, not able to outpace how bad the bench is, fine. You can make your peace with that. But there are forms of 25 wins this season that, despite the high lottery pick, will feel extremely bad and cast doubt over what lies ahead for this team. You can add all the lottery picks you want. If the guys you have are not looking like they're anything to build around, then great. You add another lottery pick. It's not going to help the long-term vision all that much if the guys you already have who you're nurturing aren't being properly brought along. So that's just to consider. That's how the underachievement looks, right? This team, if they underachieve, it's their offense can't get off the ground. They can't parlay the better talent that they have from last year, the healthier talent, and the offensive system they run into better offense. They still stink in the half court. Maybe they take some regression in transition because they were so bloody good at transition last year that some regression is probably likely, just because it's really hard to be that good all the time. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of ways in which, the people the lottery sickos will be, rejoicing over having good odds. But in general, the shape of the team looks pretty gruff and grim after the next 6 months. So that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully that doesn't happen. If the offense can be good, I think that's going to avoid that sort of worst case scenario. If the offense can kind of, kick above water a little bit and be in the top half of the league, which I think is very much on the table if things break right, then I think you're kind of avoiding that worst case scenario where you feel like everything sucks and there's no hope or reason to keep on being around once you get into the off season. Shout out Carl Havoc. All right, we're going to come back on the other side. We're going to round it out with just sort of what happens if this is an underachievement year? What happens if things go poorly? What does that mean for the off season? What does that mean for the guys on the team? We'll get to that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. And NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, North America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. It's that simple. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And it's not just those in-game live bets that I know some people are fond of. I am not much of a sports gambler, but when I do, I am doing it on a hunch for a season-long future where I know I'm smarter than what these lines say. I'm picking this team to go and win the championship, or picking this player to go and win the MVP. I am still riding high off of picking the Denver Nuggets to win the title 2 years ago at like 19-1. It was the most confident I've ever felt throwing money down, and it was awesome. If you feel that good about a team winning the title this year, you can go throw some money. I might do that for the Denver Nuggets again. I think people are sleeping on the Nuggets. Nikola Jokic, still the best guy. Either way, go check it out all over at FanDuel.com, the #1 sports book in North America and the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. Wrapping it up here on your Friday edition of Locked On Raptors as we send you off into the final preseason game tonight. Very exciting. We'll talk about that game on Monday's podcast. And then Tuesday, we are dropping the annual special that we all know and love. It is the Locked On Raptors 8th annual over-unders and props spectacular with myself, Vivek Jacob, and Sahal Abdi. I'm still looking for my first win. I think Vivek's on 4 wins and Sahal's on 3 now. It's very upsetting. But yeah, looking forward to that. One of my favorite episodes every year. And of course, there will be a listener competition for that as well to go win some tickets like our guy Blair Weston did for winning last year's over-under competition. So looking forward to that. All right, let's get to what happens if this season is an underachievement. What goes down if things go poorly and all of what we talked about, the injury stuff happens or there's stagnation from the main core guys? Like if the real underachievement from the player development perspective happens, regardless of win total, what is the plan? What is the next step? Like this season is going to dictate a lot about what the team does next summer. If things go wonderfully, if RJ, sticks and can figure out how to be a league average defender, if Quickley makes the jump and is looking like a real lead guard on a good team, if Scottie is creeping towards all NBA or help makes all NBA, then I think you go into the summer and it becomes a summer almost of aggression, right? Where it's like, all right, we got something here. We've got extra picks to play with. Now we've got some young prospects in the pipeline. Maybe we can go and find ourselves a real deal here to go and bring in a guy who helps us and sort of bolsters us, akin to like the Donovan Mitchell trade the Cavs made a couple years back. That's kind of what I'm looking at. I would love to see that be the outcome. I'm a guy who thinks trades are the way you build teams in non-free agent markets. As much as the draft is helpful and necessary, I also think trades are a really big part of it. And the Raptors historically, maybe not the last couple of years, but historically have been quite good at doing trades. And so I think that becomes a very real possibility if things go really well this season with the core guys, regardless of the win total. I think if things don't go great, if we get that aforementioned stagnation from Quickley and Barrett and they just can't scale up, they don't look like they can be real starters on a good team. If Scottie is still maybe a couple of years away from hitting that upside and we get a little bit of doubt cast upon whether he can actually hit that upside, if Grady Dick looks like maybe he's more of a long-term bench player than a long-term starter, you go into next summer with all kinds of things to contemplate. And I think basically anything other than trading Scottie Barnes becomes on the table if this is a really rough season for the guys who matter the most. I don't relish the idea of that. Think it would suck, but like it's on the table. Like if Quickley's not doing, and maybe you can't trade Quickley if he has a bad year and he kind of flames out in a lead guard role and can't handle the burden, can't handle the two-way responsibilities of it. Maybe you can't trade him at $32.5 million a year next summer. I think that's still a deal you could probably move to a team that's maybe a little bit more ready to absorb a guard like him. I think like the Orlando Magic, for example, come to mind. We're getting way ahead of ourselves here, and I do not want to see Immanuel Quickley traded because I love watching Immanuel Quickley play basketball. But that is what you have to contemplate here if the underachievement for the best players on this team takes place. If they're just not working, if they get bludgeoned on the defensive end again, if they're not able to have a positive net rating as a lineup, like if the Raptors starters go into this year and come out of it as like a negative lineup, that is a disaster. That is the underachievement of all underachievements because it suggests that there's just not anything to work with here. This is not something you can build on. As much as these guys are young and can get better, they're also mature enough as players and advanced enough as players that if they're losing minutes outright with that starting five on the floor, that is like a full-on, full-scale disaster, and they are kind of back to square one a little bit. I don't think that's going to happen, to be clear. I think the Raptors starters are going to whip ass. I think they're going to be really good, and I do think it's going to be the bench that causes things to get dragged down. And so, I think, again, the sort of, to me, ideal way this goes is, and the ideal way this goes is the bench is awesome. The starters look really good and they go and win, high 30s, low 40s games and surprise everybody and look like they're really building something going forward. Just with more time, a couple additions, they can be a real hitter in the next couple seasons. That's like the best case outcome here. If you're going to get a sort of low win season, if they're going to win 25 games again, the best shape for that to take is the bench guys are the ones who are pulling it down. The veteran bench guys, right? There's still rookies who you can kind of hopefully envision moving into becoming that second wave of guys for you down the line. It's probably not going to happen this year because rookies are bad. But if it's just that Davion Mitchell and Ochai Agbaji and Kelly Olynyk and Bruce Brown and Chris Boucher are so bad and so negative when they're on the floor that they win 25 games despite the best efforts of the starters, and you get the 7th overall pick as a result, or you're the 7th best odds and, see where it lies after lottery night, I think you can make your peace with that. I think that's fine. And even then, like, even if they are in that spot where the starters, are good, but the bench sucks and they are in that 7th to 8th or 6, 7, 8 range of the draft. I don't think they're getting any lower than that because the teams at the bottom stink. And add the Clippers to the bucket of teams that I think are going to stink out loud this season after the very upsetting news about Kawhi Leonard yesterday. But if they're in that 6, 7, 8 range, and you go into the summer after a really nice season from the starters and the young guys, and you feel all right, I still think there's room for them to be aggressive this summer and try to make additions to bolster this thing going into next year to really ensure the bench doesn't cause them to suck again. Again, I think it's tough because the underachievement thing has a lot more nuance to it than the overachievement thing. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's just the young, good players play good and you feel pretty good about things, regardless of where things fall in the standings. And if they don't, boy, oh boy, things get pretty ugly. I feel like that's a good place to leave this for now. We'll be back again on Mondays. We'll break down the final preseason game and just sort of some full preseason takeaways at large, what we're feeling after 5 preseason games heading into the season, which of course begins on Wednesday against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Tuesday, we will have our over-under special. Wednesday, we're going to have our bold predictions special with Joseph Cacharo. That was a ton of fun last year. Looking forward to that one again. And then, of course, we'll break down the opener on Thursday and hopefully some practice and stuff next week too. Maybe get some interviews and things like that. Yeah, very much looking forward to being around the team this year and bringing it to you here on this here podcast. And of course, with the Locked On Raptors daily newsletter. Go and subscribe. Link in the description of the podcast, right next to the Discord link. So go to the Discord. That's free. Come get the newsletter. That's free. We're just giving you free stuff all over the place. Free me. That's good, right? That's a good pitch. I shouldn't have done that. That ruined the pitch. But anyway, go please do all that stuff. It's going to be lots of great stuff this season. Very much looking forward to covering the team for you, not just in podcast form, but in written newsletter form. And the newsletter is going to have all kinds of fun stuff in there as well. Not just my original writing, but original writing from someone you may know from this podcast. I don't want to tease it too hard because I think it's fun to leave a little suspense, but there's going to be that. There's going to be Josh Lloyd, who we saw in yesterday's podcast, is going to have fantasy tips for you at the bottom of every newsletter as well. So there's a reason to go for that, if nothing else. There's going to be fun little stuff all the way through it. Links to all the best coverage of the league and the Raptors around the NBA internet and all that stuff too. So please, there's no downside to subscribing, and it helps me very much if you go subscribe. So thanks in advance for doing that. Link in the description of the podcast and all over my socials. So go and check it out at Woodley Sean, Locked On Raptors on Instagram, etc., etc. All right, I'm done pitching now. We'll be back again on Monday. Enjoy the preseason game. Enjoy the weekend, and we'll talk to you in a couple days. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. Oh, my streak ends. But man, oh man, I'm still right on it.